Hello there, and welcome to the Business of Story. I'm your host, Park Howell. How are you uniquely gifted? I mean, what do you bring to the world through your curiosity, through your passion and your talent that no one else can, and how do you express it through your personal and professional brand? But you might be thinking, I don't know, I'm not sure if I have a particular ability that people really care about. Well, you're not alone, because in my experience, lots of people tumble through life stumbling over their unique God-given gifts without realizing the impact they could have if they just embraced them. Our guest today, Joy Spencer, founder of Reframe to C.R.E.A.T.E, will share with you her C.R.E.A.T.E process that will help you identify your gifts and share them with the world. She'll take us step by step through her process, and you might just be surprised at what gifts materialize in your life. Henry Belcaster was stuck in a slump, and as Dr. Seuss would say, unslumping yourself is not easily done. Henry started a science channel on YouTube in January of 2022 called Smart Nonsense. He put tremendous effort into sharing his gift of simplifying science in entertaining videos. He calls it explaining nerdy stuff like you're 5 years old. But he wallowed in little to no viewership in the first 7 months of launching his Smart Nonsense channel. Then he miraculously captured the attention of his viewers in September of that same year, when he did something that he didn't even realize he was doing. His scripts became amazing examples of the ABT, the and, but, and therefore narrative framework in action. Listen to this short episode he calls Why All of the Earth's Coal is the Same Age, and count how many embedded ABTs are used in this 1-minute video.
All of the coal on Earth was made at the exact same time, then never again. What? So, 360 million years ago, a Carboniferous period. Basically, coal is just ancient plants and trees that fossilized into pure carbon, coal. But many moons ago, everything was just plants, no trees. Plants hadn't figured out how to become big woody trees yet. So when a plant died, bacteria would they'd eat every last bit, and nothing was left to fossilize, no coal. But then this curious thing starts to appear, lignin, the stuff that gives wood its woodiness, basically the first trees. And because these lignins made plants stronger, they start to take over the world. But there's a problem. See, when these strong lignin plants died, bacteria hadn't figured out how to eat them. So all these dead trees start piling up, not being eaten, and they turn into coal. But 60 million years later, bacteria figured out how to eat lignins. They start eating all the dead plants and trees again, and no more coal on Earth. Get more free lessons on our site, smartnonsense.com.
Henry's viewership absolutely hockey sticked to around 600,000 subscribers by January of 2023 and is near 2.4 million subscribers today. He is sharing his gift of making complicated science simple and entertaining for everyone to enjoy. I use Henry's success as just another example of how the ABT quickly captures attention, captivates audiences, and makes your complex communications clear, concise, and compelling. And I would love to show you how to do that. But to make it work, you first must get clear on what your gifts are and how you express them to the world. Joy Spencer will show you exactly how to do that today.
It's a framework that I created to help professionals move away from being productivity hamsters to becoming creating mavens. So it's about both mindset and also about what you'll create at the end of it. So the 6 steps are, the first step is to clarify your unique contribution. Like, you've got to know, what is it that I create and that's unique that I create with my gifts? And everyone has something or a series of things, whether it's a project, a product, a service, or an experience, that they can't help but create. Every time you follow them around, they're always doing this thing. They keep creating this thing. You have to sort of like tap them on the shoulder and be like, hey, do you notice that you always create this? Everywhere you go, your fingerprints are all of this thing.
Joy is an executive and storytelling coach, podcast host, speaker and organizational development consultant who focuses on leveraging narrative and story to build strategic alignment on teams. She earned a master's in international educational development from Columbia University's Teachers College and a bachelor's in economics from the College of William and Mary. Joy's experience includes 20 years of advocacy, research, and championing positive change in social movements driving for global access to essential medicines, consumer advocacy for online privacy, public health, and diaspora investments. Today, Joy's motto is, "You can only go as far as you are," which is why she encourages leaders and teams to unearth their stories and reframe the underlying narratives that shape, drive, or inhibit their transformational growth. Through the art of storytelling and narrative rebuilding, she drives for improved leadership capacity and the greater strategic alignment that comes from clarity of vision and purpose. I am delighted to host Joy Spencer on today's edition of the Business of Story. Well, good morning, Joy. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Park. I'm happy to be here.
Now, you've got quite a storytelling background, and you teach a lot about reframing our stories to become more powerful, in the journeys we're on. How did you get into storytelling?
Well, my storytelling journey started by accident in the social justice world, and it was sort of more subliminal. We, as activists working on access to essential medicines, would often use stories to make our case, make our point, to inspire those who are going to join our movement. And we did a lot of narrative building together as a community of lawyers, economists, other activists. So we would often huddle into rooms, into meetings to craft and talk and hash out what's the story? What's the message? What are we trying to get here? So that was part of that, embedded into that work. But years later, after becoming a coach and starting to work internally in an organization, I got a storytelling project. And as part of that project, I was working with the senior leaders in the organization to help them to tell their stories and use their stories for leadership lessons. And that's really how I started getting really deep into the practice of actually helping people tell their stories and using storytelling workshops. So it sort of went from sort of embedded in the work to now something intentional and focused that I'm doing.
Can you give us an example of your storytelling in the social justice work around access to medicine?
Yeah. So, one of the things that we often did when we were in social justice work was, so take for example the access to essential medicines work. Our leadership and our team was often engaged with other activists in the work, but that wasn't really getting down to the folks who were directly impacted by the work. So we would partner with nonprofits who had folks who were directly impacted. And one of the stories, when it actually was in a documentary called Dying for Drugs, where there was a young family in Guatemala who was trying to get medication for the son in the as part of the family, and they couldn't get access to fluconazole. Long story, because they were being priced out of the market, and unfortunately he dies before the end of the documentary. So that was one of the first and earliest stories that I heard, and my boss sort of gave me the DVD early on in the work and was like, "Here, watch this." And that story really gave me a sense of inspiration and knowing why we were doing what we were doing. It wasn't just theoretical. It wasn't just about trade agreements, but it was about people like that young boy, or like people like Zaki, who was a colleague who was HIV positive and also, fighting to get access to drugs. So having personal stories and being connected to personal stories, and the reason behind why what we were doing the reason why we were doing what we were doing was really what propelled a lot of our work.
And isn't it amazing the power of that one story about that one individual, that one kid?
Yeah.
Christoph Nicholas from the New York Times wrote an exceptional article in Outside Magazine talking about his work in Darfur. And that what nonprofits can learn from marketers. And his main point is it's that singular narrative, that singular character, that people will give more money to save that little boy, and by proxy, the rest of the people in need, than they will if you said there's 200,000 of him running around, and if you write that check, you can help a small portion of that 200,000. That
Yeah.
doesn't resonate, but that singular narrative with that singular kid makes all the difference.
And that's because of connection, right? We have a hard time connecting to the masses or 200 or 300 or thousands, but we can always connect to one person. I can connect to Park. I can connect to Jane. I can connect to people who have real names and who they feel like they have flesh and bones on them right next to me. So that's the power of telling an individual story. It's that connection. And that's where all the power is with storytelling, in connection.
Yeah, and it is the front door to connection, isn't it? You come knocking with a story, get their attention, and then share an authentic, compelling story. Someone gets into a problem, gets out of a problem, and it becomes a learning tool for you. But to your point, it makes this primal connection with that Homo sapien storytelling ape sitting across from you, doesn't it?
Yeah, yeah. And you can't have any sort of influence with people or be able to bring them into action without that, right? So Annette Simmons, who wrote The Story Factor, talks about this a lot, about that connection between connection, influence, and action. And a lot of times leaders or movement builders are trying to get people to do something. They're like, why can't I get them to do this? Or how can we inspire people to do all this other stuff? And you can't move people if you don't have influence with them. And you can't have influence if you don't have that connection. And the storytelling, as you said, is that doorway into that connection.
So your work is about reframing. Can you explain that a little bit to us? What does that mean, and what are the outcomes that you strive for?
So if you think about a frame as like, a frame of your photo or a frame of your picture, it's just another way of thinking about it is the container. And it's sort of the thing that holds everything together. And the thing about containers is that they're great because they keep everything in, but they also keep a lot of things out. And so they sort of lock you into a way of seeing things in a certain perspective. And so they're great when they're working well, but not so great when they're limiting us. And so a lot of times my clients who I work with, coaching them through challenges or things that they want to develop for themselves are operating out of a framework. We all are. We're always looking through a window. You have your glasses on now. I also wear glasses. We're always looking through something. And so, in order to see something different, so that we can do and be different, we need a new frame. And that's the starting point I often work with people, whether it's individually or with teams or with groups. It's like, how can we look at things differently in order to be able to do and be different?
In stories, we use storytelling as the frame, don't we? We tell ourselves narratives, fiction, fact, you name it. We really make meaning out of the chaos of being human beings through the stories we've experienced, through the stories we've heard, through the stories we've shared, and through the stories we completely make up that we think are absolute truths, and they couldn't be further from the truth.
Yeah. And the funny thing about stories is a lot of times they're hidden, right? They're a lot of times, unless someone asks you to tell a story, share a story, remember a story, they're operating in the background, but we're not sort of aware of what's going on with them. And it's the act of telling them that we're suddenly like, oh, that's really what I think about that, or that's the reason why I think this way. I had a recent conversation with my brother, and we were just sort of like I was doing what I do with a lot of other clients, which is a resume excavation where you take people back. And I was getting him to tell some early stories about his work and getting him to dig into like, well, why do you care about this? And he started recounting stories of standing in our dad's office and looking out the window and seeing a building and then certain bridges that we used to drive over as a kid. And I could see the light bulb going off in his head because he was starting to make connections with the type of work that he ended up doing. He's like, I've loved building things since I was a kid. And it was like, aha, suddenly for him. And not just that, to have an aha about the past, but it's actually helping him to think about, well, what do I want to do going forward? Because he's thinking about leaning more into that, something that's been so unconscious for him. So even though our stories are with us, sometimes we have to tell them for them to become a living thing for us again.
So is that kind of an example of the reframing that you're talking about? Your brother was kind of viewing his career life one way. You went back as a story archaeologist and dug up some of these little tiny, which seems like seemingly insignificant moments in his life, and we all have these, that when you start putting them together, they become the scenes to the overall narrative as to what he's doing now. And if he embraces that, then he's got a new frame that makes more sense to him and something he's really passionate about to pursue. I mean, did you just walk us through your approach there?
Yeah, exactly that, and it's through and it's through a resume excavation. So it's like we're the treasure we're looking at is actual things that you've done before, and then I'm just interrogating, I'm just asking, and I'm just because I'm truly genuinely curious, and that's the benefit of a coach, someone who's outside of your story. They're asking questions because they genuinely don't know, and you think you know. But you actually don't until you start answering those questions, and it's so powerful and so insightful. So yeah, you have to look at what your current frame is, examine it in order to be able to reframe and get another look at it, and usually it's someone else reinterpreting it for you and checking for understanding and meaning that helps you to get a new frame.
I was going to say that looking at your own frame can be really difficult because we are all operating in the fog of war of our own lives. And so to be able to look at it, with an open mind is really difficult because we've already bought into these biases that help, spice up and build that current frame we have. So how can one do it for themselves or if they get a coach? What are the most powerful ways to make that reframe work, be accurate, and stick?
Powerful questions, right? So, and that's what someone else would do for you, right? So, of course, if someone else is doing it for you, they can ask the questions. But for you, if you're doing it for yourself, it's like you go back and this can be a foundation of story banking. You look through moments. You go and you identify moments that you remember. You don't have to work so hard about it. It's just anything that pops into your mind is a powerful memory for a reason. When you think about all the many things that we forget. So if you're remembering it, it's significant. So you just, noting where were you, who was there, what is it that you're, noticing about what you remember, and then just ask a question about like, well, what did I learn from this, or what was different after this, and just those questions of to pause and to ask and interrogate will bring up for you your understanding of the current frame that you have for it. And if you have any sort of discomfort or rejection of that, that's sort of you also beginning to reframe it, because you might be like, yeah, I thought this, or I'm thinking this, but like, yeah, well, no, I don't like that, or I have new information. You're seamlessly doing that reframing in that by coming at it from a different angle or trying to reinterpret it. This isn't magical or strange. We do it all the time. I'm just giving a name to something that we often do and are maybe unconscious of, and that there's an opportunity to be more intentional about it.
Can you give us an example of one of these reframing in action? I mean, you did with your brother, but now let's take it to sort of the corporate environment. And maybe it's the reframing a leader has to do first to be able to communicate that accurate story to his team or her team. Or maybe it's the reframing the team needs to embrace in order to buy into that internal initiative, that new marketing campaign or whatever. Do you have an example you can share?
Yeah, so there was a leader who I was working with, and this was part of a DI&B effort, and she was working to develop and pull out and tease out her story, and we were struggling. There was a little bit of a struggle to sort of come up and see and understand her story. And part of the challenge was because she was, she's Hispanic and she converted to Islam, and so she was trying to tell us that story of her conversion, and it was feeling a little bit clunky. And I
And
said,
Joy, you called this a DMB effort?
DI&B, yeah,
What
diversity.
is that?
Well, in our organization, it's diversity, inclusion, and belonging.
Okay.
Yes.
Gotcha.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Sorry. I was using them. And so it was, it was an effort to try to get these different diverse stories out there. And so she was struggling because of, the framework of how it was set up. And so she was using these identity markers. And I said, let's step back, right? It doesn't have to be that, on the nose. Let's look at, let's just tell me some stories. And so we ended up working through and thinking about and she started telling me some stories about her father, and a story about going into the eye of a hurricane to check on her car that she'd parked far away during, a hurricane. And so it was a strange, odd ball, sort of story. And then I just started asking and interrogating, like, okay, well, why did you do this? And why did you do this with your dad? And what was all of this? And she got so much insight from that. And the story we came out with was that she had such a deep level of trust in her dad. He's literally the only person who she would literally go into a hurricane with. And so we just leveraged that to bring that to her team, to use that and use that as a message of, who would you go into the eye of a storm with? What does it take to go into the eye of a storm with someone? If you've been part of the military, was this your band of brothers? If you've been on a sports team, and those of us who are here on this team, what is it that's going to enable us to do this? And so it helped her to think differently about how she could tell stories and how she could approach these type of messages, and also something that she can use with her team for them to think differently about, oh, this is, we're thinking about our work in this particular way, but we can look at the details of how we're showing up and how we work together to help us guide us through a number of to guide us through our challenges. So that's one of the ways that you can use story, in that case, using story as an analogy instead of just, trying to hit everything on the head with it,
Mm-hmm.
to help people to see things differently.
And when you do that, you're inviting them into the story. So it's not
Yes.
like you're pushing the story and the moral of the story on them. You're inviting them in, because storytelling really is a pull strategy.
Yes.
As you're trying to bring them into your universe. Joy, tell us about one of your most pivotal moments, could be as a kid, as a young lady, or last week, that has helped you reframe/frame what you do and what you contribute to the world.
One of those pivotal moments for me was when I was going to grad school. So I'd gotten into teachers college, and I was,
Is this Yale University?
Teachers College is part of Columbia's education
Columbia. I'm sorry.
department. So I'd gotten in the year before, and I was like, I have no idea how I'm going to pay for this. So I'd applied for a scholarship and didn't get it. And so I was like, it was time was coming to go. And so I was like, okay, well, I'm going to go. I got some funding from my dad, some from my employer, which was great, but I didn't have what I was going to pay for the full year. And so, and I was making pittance at this point, in my 20s. And I remember driving up 95 up to New York from DC with the last $40 that were in my account. And, those were back in the days when it was an easy pass. And I was watching the money go down as I was paying for the toll. And I was like, I'm going to be living on my credit card. And I have no idea how I'm going to pay for this. But I decided that I was going to go. Like, I was like, I don't know how this is going to happen, but I have to press into this experience. I'm just going to have to figure it out as I go along. And there were people who showed up, and scholarships and things who showed up all along the way for me to make it through that journey. But I didn't know any of that going into it. And that has really been instrumental in how I approach much of my life, whether I'm moving or working with folks. I often will find myself continuing to leap into the unknown, trusting that I'll have help, trusting that I don't need to know right now how it's going to work out or who all the people are that are going to rise up to be my support. And I encourage my clients to sort of lean into that trust as well. Like, you don't have to know everything. You don't have to have everything figured out. Life will figure it out for you in the unfolding. And so I think it helps me to show up with curiosity, because a lot of the times I'm inviting people to enter into curiosity. I'm inviting people to imagine. I'm inviting people to think about creating something new and unknown. And that can be scary and frightening. But if you have a sense of it's going to be okay. And if you have someone along the way and along the journey who's like, it's okay, you can press into this and it'll be fine. You will have help, and you don't need to know ahead of time what that help is going to be. I think that's made me a little bit more courageous in life.
And do you share that story a lot with your customers or with your prospects, or when does it show up in your work?
I've shared that story in my podcast. So I have a podcast, and so I do a lot of storytelling, sharing in the podcast, and I will build a lot of my messages around a personal story and stories that I know of others. And so I have, but that's not my only like sort of courageous story of leaping into the unknown. I have a similar story of going to teach English in Bosnia and sort of like the surprise and challenge of that as well. And so those are leaping into the unknown is often something that I like to share and challenge people to, because I think there's a lot of that going on right
Well,
now in our lives.
and quite often people just need permission to do it, don't they? I mean, they actually have the courage. They actually have the willingness to do it. The one thing that might be holding them back is, what will people think? You know? And it's you, in essence, demonstrating that through your story, how you leaped into the unknown, and that they can do it too. You essentially are giving them permission, and so that they can give themselves permission to take a crazy leap. I did that when I was running my ad agency, Park & Co. Had it for 20 years. And at the ripe old age of 55, I shut it down. I didn't sell it. I just turned off the lights and started the business of story. And people looked at me and thought I was crazy. Why would you build it over 20 years and not sell it? Well, the answer to that is I would have been beholden to whoever bought it for another 5 years to build something that I was no longer passionate about, And I know people, and even myself, I'd wake up in the middle of the night with a cold sweat saying, what in the hell am I doing? Have I lost my mind? But to your point, Joy, is you do it. You take the leap, and if your heart is really in it, and you've got the persistence and the passion and the energy to keep pushing forward no matter what, then it is going to probably unfold even in greater ways than you ever imagined.
Yeah. You have to be okay with not having an answer for other people as well. People will ask questions. Are you crazy? What are you doing? What's your plan? And sometimes you'll have an answer, and it's okay sometimes to not have an answer. And I think that can be even more challenging, where you feel like I should have an answer. I feel like a very bad adult right now that I'm out here running around without a plan. But that was what was so pivotal for me in some of my life transitions, has been having key people. I have two key people in my life who, whenever I'm doing something strange and I can't explain it to anybody, least of all myself, they're always there to be like, we know this is going to be good, Joy. You have a track record with this. It's going to be awesome. Keep going, keep pushing. And you need that. You need your bullheadedness, yes, but then you also need the cheerleaders who can cheer you on when you're even like, it's very dark out here, and I might have made a mistake here. And you need them to be like, no, keep going, keep pushing. So yeah, very important people.
I have that in my good friend, Pete Walsh. He is a family business coach known the world over. Great guy. And he will do one of three things with me when I'll be bouncing ideas off of him, or if I'm coming in and not sure. First thing is, he's almost always encouraging. No matter what the outcome is, like, man, you're sitting in a great spot. This could really work, and this is really cool. Be thinking about this, whatever. Number two, you might want to pump the brakes on that just a minute, Park. Let's examine everything, because last week you told me this, now this week you're telling me that. Two different stories. Or the third one is just plain, I got to punch you in the nose on that one, Park. That makes no sense whatsoever.
We need those people. I call those journey people. They're there for the journey.
Yeah, the journey men and women in our lives. Huh?
Yeah.
Well, can you tell us about your C.R.E.A.T.E framework? I know nothing about it, and as I was doing my research on you, I came across it, and I tried to download it from your website, but I kept getting an error. Probably user error on my side, but I would love to hear what the C.R.E.A.T.E framework is.
Wonderful. So it's a framework that I created to help professionals move away from being productivity hamsters to becoming creating mavens. So it's about both mindset and also about what you'll create at the end of it. So the 6 steps are, the first step is to clarify your unique contribution. Like you've got to know, what is it that I create and that's unique that I create with my gifts? And everyone has something or a series of things, whether it's a project, a product, a service, or an experience that they can't help but create. Every time you follow them around, they're always doing this thing. They keep creating this thing. They, you have to sort of like tap them on the shoulder and be like, "Hey, do you notice that you always create this everywhere you go? Your fingerprints are all of this thing."
Give
So
us
that,
some examples of that.
yeah. So for some people, it's like about, so for example, I have a friend who her thing, she creates wonderful experiences. She's the person in the friend group who is going to, we can't just go on a trip, right? She's going to there's going to be an agenda, there's going to be experience. She's looking for the vibe, the feel, the tone of everything. That's a unique gift, right? And so because it's sort of intangible, sometimes people, can't sort of place that. But someone who creates experiences has a gift. There are people who create actual products, right? So like they create things with their hands. We're more familiar with those folks. Like they're going to be doing a painting, or they're gonna put the bookshelf together. They're gonna, they craft things, or more things were traditionally that we know, plays, or other folks in the arts. That's, we're familiar with those. And then we've got, the service folks, or those of us who are in the coaching field. We've got the project folks, people who may feel like they're not as creative, but they know how to bring and pull a project together, and resources and folks. So there so many things that people create across the gamut, but they're just often unaware that that's the thing that they do. That's your first step.
I was thinking about that when you're saying that. My wife, Michelle, is an interior designer, and she has a particularly keen creative eye for colors and patterns. I mean, so much so that a lot of our clients would look at a wall she was going to paint a vibrant yellow, and they would say, "Are you kidding me? I would never do that in my whole life. I can't do that." And of course, they would do it, and then they would hug her and say, "Oh my God, I didn't have the courage you did. I love it." But what she does is she constantly is creating these little vignettes on tabletops, on bookshelves, the color patterns she'll put together for a chair, and then she'll weave all these vignettes together to do the overall design. And I've really seen her in action now, because we're getting ready for our son's wedding here at our home, and all of the little detailed vignettes and ideas that are going on. And I thought, in her wake, she is always leaving behind, and because she's created them, what I now call these vibrant vignettes. That is her gift to the world.
Yeah,
and I had never thought about that before until you just now described that.
Well, now you can go tell her that where her unique contribution is, and tell her to keep at it. But that's the first step. You want to be really crystal clear on that. And then there's R, which is reframe your environment. So that's like, okay, I know what my thing is, and now it's like, okay, this is where you're getting into energy management, where you're getting into priority management, attention management, and in addition to boundary management, and also physically managing your space. All the things that you need to do to support you being able to really dive into launching to consistently creating. That's something that people often leave out. They're relying on motivation, they're relying on so many other things, but you have to have an environment, a life environment that supports that. And often that requires reframing your environment. And then E is express your gifts for yourself. A lot of times people get stuck and they think, oh, I have to do, especially in this hustle culture era, I've got to do something with this. I've got to monetize this. And the first step is to just really be someone who is in the practice of creating just for yourself. And just being like, it doesn't have to turn into anything. I'm always going to be committed to this. I don't have to go big or go home. I'm a creating maven. I'm going to, if it's just me always in my basement painting my art, it's still worth it. It's still valuable. Because for me, creating is to the soul what breathing is to the body. It's just something that you just have to do and need to do. So we need to get out of that, sort of mindset where it's like, oh, if it doesn't turn a profit, it's not worth anything. No, it's worth something to you. So that's the first step before A, which is activate your gifts for others, right? So it's like, I may offer this to the world, but I'm always going to make sure I'm expressing my gifts for myself. So activate your gifts for others is just that. But it's not like, I got to be Oprah. I have to be Tiger Woods. It's not go big or go home. It's creating something with my gift, doing some sort of prototype and offering it in service to at least one other person. That's it. In service to one other person. Happy for you if you get to the masses, tens and millions, good for you. But if you only get to one, that's all that's required. So a lot of times people will use, oh, I can't go big as an excuse to do nothing. And I'm like, oh no, honey, there is no excuse. You can serve at least one person,
It's funny you say that because when I do my keynotes and or trainings, and I did one last week for the Phoenix Business Journal, and they had their annual nonprofit summit. So I had in the room almost 200 executives, executive directors from nonprofits, and I took them through a very, very quick 20-minute training. And it seemed to go over well. I was reading the audience and it felt good and whatever. And quite often when those things are done, you'll get a long line of people coming up and ask you questions. Well, 5 minutes went by and I had no line whatsoever. And I thought, oh, did I blow it? Did I miss the mark? What? And then this one young lady came up and she just said, that blew my mind. And in fact, I completely rewrote my landing page right here while we were doing that. I'm going to work on a little more. Can I send it to you for your insight? I said, absolutely. She walked off. Then all of a sudden another gentleman walked in. Mm-hmm. And then a third person walked up. And I felt leaving there, Joy, only if I reached those three people and had an impact on them, then all the rest of it is worth it. Because you do know there's a lot more people there that you did impact, they just didn't come up. So you don't have any physical proof of that. But to your point, creating for the sake of creating and helping at least one other.
Yes, because it matters, just as you matter to you and you matter to the people in your life, those other people, they matter as well. We sometimes discount individuals because we're going for the numbers. And
so Joy, let me ask you this real quick. How did you learn this activate your gifts for others? Because you're young, you're trying to build a business, you've got bills to pay.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you get out of college, you don't have a lot of money, you went to a very prestigious school. Hats off to you. I always wanted to go to Columbia. Got to go there once for an interview and that was it. But how do you keep your own self from playing into that, oh my God, I got to get this out there and I got to make as much money as I can because I got to pay these bills, versus having that reframing of, as long as I help one other person, it's cool?
I think it might be a function of my personality, but I think it's also that I separate out the bill paying from what I do because I care about it and I'm passionate. And we're about to get into a whole other conversation. So take, for example, so in an interim year, when I was transitioning from one career to another, I was consulting for a couple of years with the World Bank. And that was the time when I'd started going into my coaching program because I was like getting into a new career. I wanted to be a coach. But I was consulting at the World Bank. So, you go to networking events and people ask you like, well, what do you do? What do you do? And I was like, oh, I consult with the World Bank. And then it'd be like, oh yeah, let's talk about the World Bank. And I was like, ah. And I was like, I had this thing in my whole body. And I was like, I don't want to talk about the World Bank. I was like, be gritting my teeth. And then I was like, Joy, you're doing this to yourself. You keep putting forth the thing that you're doing to make money and pay your bills right now. But that's not your thing, right? You are passionate about and about to get into this whole new world of coaching. Yes, you don't have a coaching client yet. Yes, you're not making money from it yet. But why don't you talk about that? Why isn't that your focus? Why isn't that the thing that you're surfacing? Why do you keep talking about automatically the thing that pays your bills? And I think that making that shifted a lot of things for me in terms of becoming more mission-minded and how I think about my work and what I'm doing and what I'm here to do. Everybody has bills to pay. My friend once told me, she's like, even Oprah has bills, right? Like everybody's got bills. Like you're not special if you have bills. So you don't have to keep talking about the bills that you're paying all day, every day that you have to pay, or the job that you have that is paying those bills. You get to talk about whatever it is that you want to talk about. You get to craft your life around your mission and what you're interested in. And as a reasonable and responsible adult, I'm sure you're going to pay those bills somehow. You get to choose however you do that. 2, 3 jobs, whatever, part entrepreneurship, not entrepreneur, whatever you want to do, but you don't have to define yourself by that or always talk about that, or that, that doesn't have to be the driving force. And so I think splitting that off for myself has helped me to really devote myself to the mission that I'm about to reframe, to create, to like the movement I'm about, helping people to reframe how they think about work and jobs and all of the things around creativity without being locked into how we talk about work and how we make our money and how we pay our bills, which are not going anywhere unless we suddenly win the lottery and become independently wealthy.
The only difference between my bills and Oprah's bills is I'm assuming hers are a lot bigger.
Yes, and she has a bigger paycheck to pay for it. Well,
Yeah,
so
exactly.
To each his own.
So we're going through your CREATE acronym. We start with create your unique contribution.
Yeah, clarify your unique contribution.
I'm sorry, clarify your unique contribution. Thank you. Reframe your environment. And that is really your physical environment, your mindset, your energy, your boundaries, what you're going to say no to so you can be successful with the things you are going to say yes to. Then you've got to express your gift through yourself. Activate your gifts for others. So we've got two more, T and E.
Yeah,
what are those?
So T is track and get feedback. And you can do that any way you want. That is about being aware and alert to what your audience or whoever you're creating for is saying about what you're creating. You have this bright idea, you have this thing you want to give to the world. How is it being received? Or what do people say about what you're giving out that's valuable to them? And because you'll get some different data back. For example, for me, I started the Reframe to Create journey really focused on the create aspect. I was like, I'm going to help people to create. I'm going to be the creativity midwife. People are going to be creating things, products, services, etc. And that's great. I talk about that and that's my focus. But what people want from me and want to hear from me is more about storytelling. And that wasn't what I had. It was part of the work. It was part of the conversation, but it wasn't what I led with. That wasn't what I thought I was going to offer. It was just sort of like the way that I did things, and I just sort of threw it in there. And so if I was going to be, bullheaded about it, I'd be like, no, you get no storytelling here. You will create, right?
Whether you like it or not,
Exactly.
The creation will continue.
Exactly. And they're not at cross purposes. They work together, but I'm paying more attention to what I'm hearing and getting back so that I can serve those who have come to me for that service. And of course, I can always, be in my own corner creating what I want to create. But you want to like get that feedback so that you can be of more service. And that's that E, which is evolve, and do it again. Like you just start again. Like you can go back to the beginning. You can see if you need to re-clarify your contribution, you can jump in at any other part of the framework, but it's about being in that posture of like, this is cyclical. This is not a one and done. This is a mindset. This is a lifestyle shift. This is how you want to show up in your work, because your work is not your job or your career. Your work is what you create. And that's the powerful legacy that you have the opportunity to leave. So be about that.
So how is your consulting career, coaching career going?
It's good. It's going. I have it in tandem with working in an organization. So I'm an intrapreneur and an entrepreneur. And the great thing about that is the bills are getting paid. And I get to be, creative and stretch out in the way that I want and meet new people and expand and explore without the pressure of, I've got to, feed or think here. So everyone has their preference and way of doing it. I see no reason to not take money from everywhere that I can get it. So,
well, yeah, you got to pay those Oprah bills. I hear you.
Yes.
Well, Joy, this has been an absolute joy. Thank you so much for being here. Where can people find you, learn more about you, or connect with you directly?
Yes, people can find me on LinkedIn. I spend a lot of time there spouting off my thoughts. And I'm also on my website, reframetocreate.com. You can follow me there. And please listen to the podcast by the same name, reframetocreate.com, Reframe to Create. And it is on Apple, Spotify, all the major wherever you listen to
Yeah.
your podcasts. And
How long have you had your show?
It's been over 3 years. Yeah, I've had it over 3 years now.
That's awesome. And I think you're up to like 80 some episodes, right?
Yes, I do it every other week, and I actually even took a hiatus. I took a little break and early last year, and I'm still back and plugging away. So yeah.
Oh, congratulations on that. I know, having done this for over 8 years now, sometimes I feel like I'm in that part where I'm expressing my gift to myself, because you don't make a lot of money as a podcaster, or any for that matter. You spend money, invest in it to get it out there. But right about the time that I feel like I'm going to quit Joy because I'm not having joy in it, is someone will send me a note, that one person out there, and say, I listened to Joy Spencer, and that was such a great interview about this particular point. Keep up the good work. And that's what always keeps me coming back. It's always that one person.
Yeah, it is. That connection. Yeah. That's what we are. We're one-to-one people.
Isn't that the truth? Well, thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us. And I can't wait to hear from our listeners about what they think of your Reframe to Create work. I love it myself.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It's been great.
Are you ready to reframe your story to create the life you're looking for? Or maybe you know someone who needs to hear Joy's message and use her CREATE process to find and express their gifts. If so, please share this episode with them. Next week is the start of college football, what used to be my favorite sport that consumed my Saturdays. But with the money grab of ESPN, Fox Sports, and prominent universities, the NCAA has been co-opted or corrupted by ruthless media. So I'm excited to have the Pac-12 Network's Yogi Roth with me next week to talk about the state of college football and how he is using storytelling to launch his new podcast, Y Option, that focuses on West Coast college football. I hope you'll join me. I'd like to thank Caden Howell for editing our show, Marissa Hill for marketing, and Darius Holbert for our custom music. Until next Monday, remember, as you're thinking through your gifts, that the most potent story you will ever tell is the story you tell yourself. So make that one epic. Thanks so much for listening.